Okay. Thank you all for your patience as Zoom trickled everyone in this morning. We didn't want to start until we were all in the room. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 Martin Luther King Jr. Day Keynote panel. My name is Tyler Harper. I'm an assistant professor of environmental studies and a co-chair of the Bates MLK Day Committee. Before we get started today, I want to say a few really quick words about our format. Our presentation today is set up as a Zoom webinar, which means that if you're in the audience, your audio and video are turned off. Additionally, our keynote panel will conclude with a moderated discussion among our panelists, which means that we won't be taking audience questions. For that reason, we ask that you do not use the chat feature to ask questions. Please only use the chat feature if you're experiencing a technical difficulty you'd like us to be aware of. Finally, I'd like to remind everyone that we have a full day of workshop and activities planned, so we hope you will take the opportunity to register for the other exciting events taking place throughout the day. With that, I will turn things over to Bates President Clayton Spencer, who will be making opening remarks this morning.
Thank you, and let me add my welcome to everyone who is here with us today. I was going to apologize that we were still in a virtual format, but given the weather, I'm kind of glad that we were already set up to welcome the large number of people who are interested. So thank you all for coming and joining us this morning. I want to begin by thanking this year's MLK Planning Committee and the many staff and faculty across the campus who have worked so hard and creatively to pull together today's very rich array of workshops, lectures, panel discussions, and performances. And I want to offer special thanks to this year's co-chairs, Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies, Tyler Harper, and Assistant Professor of Theater, Clifford Odell, for their wonderful ideas and many hours that they have contributed to get us to this point today. The committee itself has described today's events as an intense community-wide opportunity to discuss, teach, and reflect on the legacy of civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. They've also described it as a time to examine contemporary human issues through the lens of King's work and ideas, broadly defined. And finally, they've invited us all to partake of a day of thought, reflection, and aspiration for the entire community. The programming offered on this important day demonstrates in form and substance that decolonization and liberation involve many different visions, both complementary and conflicting. These visions encompass both ideas and practice and demand that we open ourselves to transformation and to the reimagination of the values by which we live, work, and organize structures of opportunity for human fulfillment. I especially want to note the care and thought that went into designing this morning's keynote panel. The MLK Committee, in asking us to consider what we mean when we say decolonization or liberation, pushes us beyond the academic and theoretical to look at and engage with the practical, real-life, everyday enactments of these ideas, not just what we say, but what we do. Our 5 panelists, each in their own ways, each working towards specific goals with the different communities they serve, are doing extraordinary transformative work, and they will no doubt have many compelling insights to share. Hamza, Pious, Jordia, Maria, Julia, I really want to thank you for your generosity in coming to us today to share your experiences and insights. I would like to mention one more thing before I pass the baton. This year's Martin Luther King Day theme speaks to the very essence of our mission as a liberal arts college. In his oft-cited essay on the goals of a liberal education, Only Connect, noted historian and Bates honorary degree recipient and parent, William Cronin, explains that the term liberal or liberal arts education certainly does not mean an education that indoctrinates students in the values of political liberalism in the most obvious sense of that phrase. Rather, it derives from the Latin word liber, meaning free. The term also goes back to ancient Greek and to the Sanskrit word rodhati, meaning one climbs or one grows. Cronin argues that liberal education is built centrally on these values and thus has as its aim to nurture the growth of human talent in the service of human freedom. The point here is not to go down a rabbit hole of etymology, but rather to realize that it is core to who we are and what we do as a liberal arts college and as this liberal arts college to figure out what an education for human freedom might actually look like. In other words, the explorations that we are asked to undertake as a community today of what we mean when we say liberation or decolonization should be understood not as a project for a special day set aside to honor an icon in the quest for human liberation, but rather as the essence of the work we should be getting up to do every day as individuals and a college. The late poet and scholar Bell Hooks said that decolonizing our minds and imaginations, we learn to think differently. My hope is that we come to today's many offerings with open hearts and minds and learn to think a little differently about ourselves, our work, and our worlds. Again, welcome to you all and thank you. I would now like to turn the virtual podium over to students Alia Moore and Sam Jean-Francois, who will introduce our panel.
Before we begin with Alia and Sam, just very quickly, as mentioned, I am Cliff Odell, the Assistant Professor of Theater in the Department of Theater and Dance. And just very quickly, I'd just like to say one of the most exciting parts of being on this committee is deciding what the theme is going to be for the following year. Sometimes we're coming off of themes that are going on campus. Sometimes we're coming off of current events. For example, last year, we decided to change themes in reaction to the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. This year, the theme had come from our students. Both Sam and Alia passionately put together an argument for decolonization and liberation. I admit I was a little skeptical at first. I thought the idea of decolonization was played out. I was wrong. And it was thanks to their leadership and their example that I realized that there's a lot more to decolonization than meets the eye. So it is my pleasure to introduce our student representatives on the MLK committee, Alia Moore and Sam Jean-Francois.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alia Moore. I am a sophomore at Bates, double majoring in politics and Africana with a concentration in English. During my adolescence, I was raised on the principle of celebrating MLK Day by acknowledging the pain of my ancestors' past and the beauty of the changing present. MLK Day to me is a day of empowerment, and it is a day of looking forward, rededicating and recommitting ourselves to the future we seek to build together. A future of racial, economic, and social justice. I have been working diligently with the MLK committee for the last year to illustrate the importance of MLK Day within the Black community, the Bates community, and the Winston community. As a student on the committee, my voice was always heard. I was keen on supporting this year's theme of decolonization and liberation because it is a hard and raw conversation that needs to be had in order to begin the process of equality on campus. I am honored that I was welcomed to be part of the process of making MLK celebration at Bates possible. And I hope you all walk away with an understanding of the importance of MLK Day and that you learn what we mean when we say decolonization and liberation. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam. I'm a part of the Bates class of 2023, and I'm proud to say I'm majoring in Africana studies. One of my favorite poets, Adrienne Rich, once said, "This is the oppressor's language, yet I need to talk to you." And when I began to piece together what I would say today, it only made sense that I echo these words, saying to all of you that this is the oppressor's stage, yet I need to talk to you. And y'all, I'm tired. I'm tired of watching Black mothers bury their children young. I'm tired of seeing students lead protests and institutions just as racist as our own. I'm tired of reading hashtag after hashtag of names too close to mine. And I'm tired of finding new ways to stand before all of you and say that I'm drowning. I'm sinking under the weight of being Black at Bates, Black in Maine, and Black in America. I'm tired. So this year, on behalf of the Mlk Day Committee, I challenge everyone, educators, staff, students, administration, to hear me when I say I'm tired. To remove yourselves today long enough from your comforts to recognize that your work isn't just tethered to today, but must be present every day. To listen to me when I say decolonization is meant to be unsettling. It's the shifting of what we currently believe to be true, just, and natural into a space that is free of settler sovereignty and therefore truly liberatory. And in this space, there might be a chance that Bates will no longer exist and that education exists in a way that's completely different, and that's okay. And of course, to accept me when I say that in calling for decolonization, we're calling for the eradication of everything we define as normal, making way for an existence that is impactful. I challenge everyone to work with me, not just today, but every day, so that one day I'll no longer have to say I'm tired. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam and Alia, for those extremely powerful remarks. I just want to say a few quick words about why we chose a keynote panel format rather than the traditional keynote speaker this year. As Cliff mentioned, in discussions about trying to fathom what we mean when we say decolonization, we realize that the definitions of decolonization are many, and that in the spirit of conversation, a keynote panel would be the appropriate way to do full justice to our theme this year. But I am a definition person, and I seek them out. And in thinking about our theme for this year, I reached out to a friend and asked what she meant by the term decolonization. And I asked for a 2 or 3 sentence definition, and she managed to do it in 1 sentence. And what she said is that decolonization is about running out of patience. This is a definition that stuck with me and that I think I've been thinking about in the lead up to today's event. We often like to think of patience as a positive quality, yet I'm going to engage in a bit of etymology, like President Spencer. A patient person, from the original French and Latin, it connects to the word for suffering. So in the original sense, a patient person is one who is willing to bear adversities. This is the connection between being patient and being a patient in a medical sense. So etymologically, at least, a patient person is one who suffers, who bears pain, and who usually does so quietly. In 1911, an American writer, abolitionist, and Civil War veteran named Ambrose Bierce defined patience in a way that picked up on this etymology. He said, patience is a minor form of despair disguised as a virtue. So if decolonization is about running out of patience or being impatient, as my friend suggested, then I think we might define decolonization in this way: as a practice of saying no to suffering, a practice of saying no to despair, and of asserting that we are finished sitting quietly, insisting on the possibility of change now. So this is what led to our panel rather than a single keynote. We've invited 5 very impatient people to join us in conversation today. People who are not content to wait for change, but who are determined to make change here and now in their local communities and beyond, impatiently if necessary. Guiding us through this discussion this morning is Dr. Cassandra Shepard, who Cliff will introduce to us.
Oh, I just want to say that I am really excited to have Dr. Cassandra Shepard as our moderator for this evening, for this morning rather. And let me tell you why. Cassandra Shepard is a visiting professor in the Africana program. She holds a BS from Xavier and an MA in social sciences from the University of Chicago and a PhD in African American studies from Northwestern. She has taught at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. Through archival and oral history research, Cassandra analyzes and theorizes on the intersecting relationships among race, ethnicity, gender, class, and place as they pertain to the histories, lives, and futures of African-descended people in the US and beyond. Once again, it is my pleasure to introduce Cassandra Shepard. Dr. Shepard, take it away.
Yes, thank you so much, Cliff, for the great introduction. Okay, good morning, everybody. I thank you all for being here. I would like to thank the MLK committee for their hard work organizing this event. Thank you, President Spencer, for your remarks and for being here to show leadership when it comes to the work of decolonizing. I am enthused to open our keynote conference panel for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I am honored to lead us into this conference to think about and think about the action of decolonization and liberation. People often obscure the terms decolonization and liberation, and they don't know how to apply them. Shortly put, liberation is freedom from oppression, and decolonization is an act that severs colonial ties to the ends of liberation. I ask us to apply revolutionary thinking and action to consider how we can sever colonial ties, to free ourselves and our fellow man from oppression, and to lead lives filled with freedom, equality, and justice. This is truly the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as demonstrated by his liberation theology, which is a praxis in solidarity with the oppressed. To this end, we must focus on several layers of decolonizing. Here, I use the word as a verb, decolonizing, to show it in action and progress, and to note that it is a relentless and unending fight. We must decolonize at the level of the nation state by fighting against settler forms of governance, sovereignty, and structures, by ceding control of territories to the tribal governance of indigenous nations, and by literally deoccupying land, water, and resources. We must decolonize at the level of institutions and collectives by obliterating settler practices and policies that create, exploit, and enforce racial hierarchies, that inflict violence, that become codified into practice, and that create real-world disparate outcomes that marginalize Black and Indigenous folk from resources, thereby placing us in a closer proximity to death. This decolonial work is the work of abolition, where Black bodies are not exploited in tandem with the land, and where surveillance and capitalism is severed from our skin. We must decolonize at the level of individuals, severing the personal colonial ties that we have with our thoughts, habits, beliefs, and body politics. Individuals who are serious about the work of decolonization can come together to form collectives, and those collective individuals will grow to enact collective change that will transform our ways of being on the national, institutional, and personal levels that lead to liberation. It is this work that must be done. We know that it is truly engaged when settler populations do not seek forgiveness before recompense, when they make amends for the loss, harm, suffering, and death campaigns that have been maintained for over generations. Today, I encourage you to act as a decolonial collective and to answer this question. What does it mean to sever colonial ties in our context? What does it mean to undertake the work of restorative justice? What actions must we take as a nation, as an institution, as a decolonizing collective, and as individuals? What role do we play in justice, reclamation, and reparations as a nation, institution, collective, and as individuals? What does the United States owe to displaced Indigenous and Black folk who for generations have been enslaved, removed, violently and intentionally marginalized away from resources, harmed, forced to lead lives with less dignity, and killed with state-sanctioned violence, and killed extra-legally by citizens, vigilantes, and militias? What does the state of Maine owe displaced Indigenous tribes and displaced Black people, given its land occupation, and as Maine ship captains transported slaves from Africa to North America in the 1800s, even after it was made illegal? How do we engage with this history, even as currently displaced East Africans move to Maine, attempting to find refuge? What of the academic institutions who held, sold, displaced, and prostituted its slaves while usurping Indigenous land, like the University of Alabama, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Rutgers, for example? What duty does Bates have to recompense its land relationship with the Wabanaki people, particularly as we occupy indigenous land without a land acknowledgement statement? And as faculty like Dr. Bruce Bork created scholarship and provided expert testimony that has assisted the loss of Wabanaki water rights. Given the above, what role should the Wabanaki people play on Bates campus as opposed to being one of gesture, inclusion, or tokenism? What role should Bates play in the abolition of Black people when the financial gift that Benjamin Bates donated came from his dealings with the cotton industry, meaning that it was fueled by slavery? In what ways is Bates committed to liberation when it comes to Black administration, faculty, staff, and students, and to the funding and staffing of Black programming, especially during the time of Black Lives Matter, and as students are making calls for programming that addresses structural racism, otherwise known as critical race theory? Let it be noted that students have made these calls for the purposes of educating colleagues, making the bodies of people on color safe from bigotry, ignorance, and the working of white supremacy. This once again gets us down to the individual level of decolonizing. What will you do to enact this work and to sever colonial ties in our context? I am here to carry on the anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, anti-capitalist stance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm here to remind us of Winona LaDuke's visit earlier this year or last year. I am here to ask us to commit to the doing thinking and the thinking doing of decolonizing. Let me now introduce a panel committed to engaging such questions in their work and to shaping our decolonial futures. The first panelist that I would like to introduce is Hamza Abdi. He is the Assistant Director of the Harvard Center for Community Partnerships and Volunteer Programs at Bates. Their mission is to weave together campus and community for the enrichment of liberal education and public life. And they support community-engaged learning and community-engaged research, sponsor diverse volunteer and work study opportunities, and offer grants. With that being said, first, let me go ahead and call Hamza Abdi. I'm sorry, Hamza Abdi.
Thank you, Cassandra, for the gracious introduction. I would also like to thank the MLK Day Committee who have put so much work into this wonderful event. Thank you all. And because we're speaking of decolonization and liberation, I couldn't begin without recognizing and honoring the current tribes who comprise the Wabanaki Confederacy, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Personally, I don't think that there is a better theme that I can relate to for a day like this, where we are celebrating the legacy and work of Dr. King. My reflection of this year's theme will be based on two things: the danger of colonization and its social, political, cultural impact, and what decolonization and liberation mean to me as an African expat and as a Black and immigrant person living in the US. But for a minute, I want to reflect and think of decolonization and liberation in a global context. Colonization, more specifically European colonization, has had and it still has a great deal of impact on many nations and specifically Africa. Because of the still lingering effects of colonization, nations have had to undergo domestic and national challenges to overcome the power relationships with former colonizers. Europeans began colonizing these nations to obtain resources that directly boosted their own economies at the extent of the indigenous people. Colonialism proved to be very cruel towards the indigenous people, bringing about a slavery, brutality, and death. There is no mistaking that colonialism is unfavorable to the nations affected and severely limited any room for economic or cultural growth. The impacts of colonialism are similar, regardless of the specific colonizer disease, destruction of indigenous social, political, and economic structures, repression, exploitation, land displacement, and land degradation. Colonialism, in addition to creating unstable, artificial, tribal states, normally led to the nation's entire infrastructure, roads, rail lines, and lines of communication to be dedicated to the extraction of resources from the nation into the hands of the colonizer, which then limited the formerly colonized nation's ability to stabilize their own economy and feed their own population. Thus, many people feel hopeless and are forced to leave their countries. Consequently, every year, thousands of people die in the process of migration towards any national destination, regardless of their legal status. According to the Missing Migrants Project, almost 50,000 people have lost their lives since 2014. From January to September 2021, it was estimated that almost 2,000 migrants died while crossing the Mediterranean Sea. However, it is difficult to ascertain the accurate number of deaths recorded in the Mediterranean Sea. Between 2014 and 2018, for instance, about 12,000 people were drowned, were never found. These people are risking their lives, leaving behind their families and communities, searching for liberation. This is the experience of many of our neighbors in the Lewiston-Auburn area. To me, and to many people, colonization is not just something that is limited to the past, but it's rather ongoing and present. The effect of colonization is brutal and devastating. But what does decolonization and liberation mean to me as an African expat who has a strong ties with the continent? Rediscovering myself, reclaiming my identity, and liberating myself from the colonial mindset and the trap of a very dangerous colonial education system is what decolonization and liberation mean to me. Not only has colonization taken away the lives of my ancestors, but it has also affected my whole as a person, the way I see the world, the way I identify myself. As someone who came from a country that adopted French civilization due to the colonization, I have long suffered from an identity crisis. I have lost my real identity and carried an unknown identity for many, many years. And to me, that's one of the real danger of colonization. Not only is stealing lands, but also is stealing people's identity and culture. For a long time, I rejected and renounced my own ethnic identity that I'm ethnically Somali. I lived with the colonial mentality, which is the perception of ethnic and cultural inferiority and a form of internalized racial oppression. And this is the reality in many communities and in many countries. For instance, in a lot of African Francophone countries, unless you speak French and adopt the Western culture, you won't be seen and categorized by the society as a real citizen of the country. Among other identity crises is the glamorization of light skin as the hallmark of beauty. This is more prevalent among some African women who do whatever it takes to look light-skinned in imitation of European color pigmentation. This is why the skin bleaching epidemic infected Africa, as women in many African countries were buying bleaching creams and soaps to lighten their skin with the idea that lighter skin is more appealing. In Africa, the power of colonization is tremendous, and oftentimes people fighting against the oppressive systems feel defeated, but yet continue their path to decolonization. As an African expat, an adopter and firm supporter of Pan-Africanism ideology, being part of any social political movement and boldly opposing and decrying the neo-colonialism and authoritarian political powers in Africa is an important part of decolonization. Therefore, to me, decolonization is an everyday task, an everyday call. Immigrating to the US has opened my eyes to a new world, to new realities. So how does my work in the community relate to decolonization and liberation? As a Black person race has never been an issue in Africa. And of course, I always knew that a race is a big thing in the US, and that people of color are always targeted by a system that's not designed to protect them. So racial justice became my true calling. I began to engage fruitful conversations with people around racism, discrimination, cultural diversity, and inclusion. In addition to navigating what it means to be Black in the US, I realized that colonization and oppressive systems purposely created division and barriers between members of the African immigrants and African American. I think much of the division that exists today between the two, the persistent misconceptions of each other, which are rooted in real lack of knowledge of each other's historical and cultural experiences. For example, how many people are aware of the role that African diaspora played in the struggle against colonialism in Africa? And how many people are aware of the influence that Africa's independence had on the civil rights movement? The histories and struggles of Africans on both sides of the Atlantic have always been connected to each other. I became aware that real work is needed to bridge this divide. And to me, that's also an important part of decolonization and liberation. Coming to Maine, I began to wake up to the reality that seeing and calling out colonization wasn't enough. I needed to engage colonization with an intention to dismantle it. I began to search for people who were embodying resistance, who were serious about bringing change in the community, and who challenged oppressive systems. I started to consider what it meant to amplify the voices of those who are marginalized and minoritized as an act of decolonization and resistance to the status quo. I began to dream of a way to go to places where wisdom is formed and speak with people who hold that wisdom in their bodies. Moreover, I also came to realize that as a Black person, as an immigrant, the challenges are always countless. For my first few years in Maine, I spent working for our local nonprofit community development organizations. I saw there was a real struggle in the immigrant refugee community, from housing to education to employment to health. Our immigrant neighbors face daily challenges. This affects immigrants' ability to access services, navigate the bureaucracy of government institutions, and understand the nuances of things like healthcare. It also increases the risk of being taken advantage of by those who wish to profit from their lack of language access. Immigrants may also face psychological trauma or adverse health effects from their circumstances of migration from their home country, or violence endured during their journey. This is especially true for women and girls who face an increased risk of gender-based violence, abuse, and trafficking. For those immigrants who were educated, accomplished professionals in their home country, the inability to pursue their original careers due to language and credential requirements, and the need to take low-skilled, low-paying jobs in order to quickly bring in income may result in a loss of value and self-worth. I think it is an important day for all of us to really reflect and think of what are we really doing to make this place a better place for our communities. How can we reinvigorate and continue these discussions and conversations around decolonization and liberation? And to conclude, I always remind myself that it is important to practice what I believe to be true, that dialogue is transformative, that ordinary people are wise, and that listening is very crucial. I believe decolonization is healing, and that to heal together, we must continue to show up in places where abandonment is permissible, where humans are disregarded and mistreated by our institutions of education, government, and beyond. Wisdom is lost when we are not intentional about listening and improving. Thank you all for your attention.
Yes, thank you so much, Hamza Abdi, for those amazing remarks and for your introduction. I would now like to introduce Pious Ali. He's a city councilor, a dedicated public servant, and an assertive and pragmatic leader with a compassionate, diversified skill set in community organizing, activism, and civic engagement. He is a youth and community engagement specialist at the University of Southern Maine, and he has created a meaningful and ongoing dialogue across cultural, ethnic, socioeconomic, and faith-based barriers. I would now like to introduce Pious Ali.
Thank you, Cassandra. A few updates. I don't work at Muskie School anymore. I am now at the Foundation for Portland Public Schools, but I still run the same project that I ran, that I am a founding director called Portland Empowered, where we work with immigrants and other minorities to understand the way the education system works here in the US. Thank you. And I want to apologize. People may not have, they realize that I got in late. I had a technology challenge trying to get into the Zoom, but I'm glad that I got help and I'm here with you. Today is a special day. I'm going to speak from my heart. I normally don't like writing remarks, so I didn't write anything down. I'm just going to speak as I seem fit, and how, and then reflect on what today means to me. I would like to thank my brother Hamza Abdi for touching on the European colonization of Africa. For me, colonization is not just about colonization, ruling or taking away people's power. It is taking away their culture, taking away their language, taking away their faith. I have one of the people that I grew up watching, who back home in Ghana, who was a president, a Pan-Africanist, the late former Ghanaian president, J.J. Rawlings, was once interviewed by an European TV station, and I think they touched on his Pan-Africanism. And I'm going to quote something that he says that always I carry with me. And it's not just for Christians. It applies to Muslims. It applies to every faith that have used their power to take away the traditions and the faith of indigenous people globally. He says, you may Christianize me if you want, but do not Europeanize me. The reason why he said that was, Rawlings had his first child. He was a baptized Catholic. And then he went to the Catholic priest and said, I want to name my kids. And the priest said, yeah, go ahead. What names do you want to give them? And the priest said, Rawlings mentioned a traditional African name. And the priest said that you cannot give your kids these names because they are not Catholic names. And Rawlings said to him that Catholic names are European names. I'm not European. I am African. And I want to give my kids African names. And the priest refused to baptize the kids. And Rawlings walked away with his kids and continued to name more of his kids with African names as he seems fit. He will go back into history and pick up an African hero or shiro, and then he will give those names to their kids. Many of us walk around with names that are not our names, that are names that has been given to us by our colonizers. In Africa today, there are about 13 African countries who are all French-speaking countries who are still paying money to France. They pay something that is called Colonial Tax, which means that most of their foreign reserve is saved in French banks, and it is saved under the French government's name, not their names. And if they want to take a loan for whatever reason out of their own money, they will have to borrow it at the current market rate, and they will pay interest to France, which is their own money, right? And I'm just using France as a poster boy for these practices. There are many practices that colonial countries do globally to indigenous communities that they have taken and continue to take. So here we are in Maine. What can we do as a community to help reverse some of these impacts? It will take so many years for those of us who are working to decolonize our world, our environment. For a school like Bates, I think what you can do for the students and for the community that you are associated or connected with is to look at your curriculum, to look at some of the teachings that you teach. Is there anything that has been, for lack of better word, whitewash, that does not say the truth? Because the textbook that you may be using is written by someone that is looking at it through a colonialist lens. We know that in the past few years, the textbook industry in Texas, in some of their textbooks about the American history, describes African slaves that were brought here as immigrants or something who were here to look for jobs. We have many and many textbooks like that, both in our public schools, in tertiary institutions, in our secondary education classrooms. And it is about time that institutions like Bates take the lead to look within and see whether it is some of the practices that you do, your relationship with your community, and then the books that you put in front of your students, and get rid of those that do not speak the truth. And that is one of the many ways that we can do as a community. And to each of us who are on this call, we can also look to see what are some of the practices, whether it is in our offices or at our homes, or wherever it is that we engage in the spaces that we are in, what are some of the practices that we do have or that we indulge in that is coming from, that is a colonialist practice, or that is coming from a colonialist point of view in how the world should be. I will also love to touch on something. A few days ago, or is it even yesterday, I received a lot of emails from a lot of individuals who found my private email and sent me email about, let me see if I can see what some of the things that they sent to me. About relationship between Bates and some of its staff members. We all know that even though the mainstream media and our classrooms do not necessarily highlight some of the work of the Dr. Kim that we are not comfortable with. For example, his work trying to get workers to organize. Actually, he gave his last speech in Memphis on the weekend of his death, supporting the striking sanitation workers. And he believes in the struggling of the working class. I will encourage the president of Bates and the leadership at Bates to engage these individuals in working with them. I know it's not in my place to say this, but you've invited me to speak and I've heard from them. And so I will just share that and hope that there should be a pathway forward. And if any of them is here, I saw your email, I saw it at a later time when you are asking me not to attend. I tend to attend and speak just as I'm doing. I tend to do that when there is a conflict. I will encourage both parties to find a way to work together and have a meaningful solution that will make sure that the right of the workers is upheld. So in my world, I am a Muslim, I am a Black man, I am an immigrant. And I will touch a little bit on what Hamza said about the relationship between Africans and African Americans. At national level, I have joined a lot of affiliations where we have to work together, because I believe that our liberation, if I can use that word, is connected. You cannot have a liberated African Americans or Blacks in diaspora, irrespective of where they are, without having a liberated African. We know the story of a few African Americans who moved to Ghana. When I was in high school, I have the privilege of going to the house of W.E.B. Du Bois, where I learned some of the basics of the Pan-African ideas that W.E.B. Du Bois did champion in his lifetime. Coming to America, I learned that that relationship that some of us come all the way from Africa, hoping that we are here to connect with our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. There is no well-organized strategy to have that relationship. and there's no well-organized strategy working with our indigenous cousins. And those are some of the work that we have done here in Portland to connect the two communities. So Hamza, you can join us whenever you wish, reach out, and I will connect you to be part of that work. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts on today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those comments. I would now like to introduce Jordia Benjamin. She's the Deputy Director at the Indigo Arts Alliance. The Indigo Arts Alliance, they are a Portland nonprofit dedicated to celebrating Maine-based artists of African descent. The Indigo Arts Alliance is a place where freedom of expression and personal transformation through creativity is encouraged. The Indigo Arts Alliance is rooted in two principles. First being that art is a key resource for healthy human communities that should be cultivated and celebrated. And secondly, that artists play a unique role in strengthening our multiracial democracy. They say that we need their vision and inspiration to help build a more humane, inclusive, and just world. I would now like to introduce Jordia Benjamin.
Good morning. Thank you so much for Bates College, the MLK Committee for the invitation to speak with you all today as we think about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how to build a socially just world for us all. It is also a pleasure to speak on this panel and to speak to our virtual global audiences about the work that we do here at Indigo Arts Alliance that is grounded in the idea of art plus activism. I am Jordia Benjamin, Deputy Director at Indigo Arts Alliance, which was founded in 2018, but launched in 2019. I know you can read the words that are currently on the screen, but I want to read these words to you as I believe that there is power in speaking words into action, as these are the words that ground us in our mission and our values. Our mission and core values is to build global connection by bringing together Black and Brown artists from diverse backgrounds to engage in their creative processes with an opportunity to serve as both mentors and mentees. An inaugural aspect or integral aspect of the Indigo mission is to provide Maine-based artists and African descent access to a broader range of practicing Black and Brown artists of color from around the world. This work takes place in our 60 Cove Street facility in Portland, Maine, that provides over 4,000 square feet flexible studio space. This location serves as a multidisciplinary arts studio for professional, mid-career, and emerging artists. Selected artists are provided time and space to nurture their ideas and concept while mentoring and supporting the development of another artist. Additionally, the studio space also serves as an educational space to facilitate collaboration, exploration, and growth for the general public via a variety of events we offer. We are activating this mission of being a global incubator because our work is rooted, like Cassandra already mentioned, in two principles. The first is art is a key resource for healthy community and should be cultivated and actively supported. Our second principle, artists through vision and inspiration play a singular and important role in strengthening our multiracial democracy. Our mission, core values, and principles create a melting pot where artists, leadership, creativity, and their vision provides us with a roadmap to what a healthy community could look like. A community that is equipped to dismantle and rebuild cultural narratives that have previously excluded and erased the integrity and capabilities of Black and Brown people. So how do we do that? How do we build a multiracial democracy? How do we dismantle and rebuild? We do this work through our core functions. First is our Artisan Residence programs, which is at the heart of Indigo Arts Alliance. Artists of the global African diaspora who have proven commitment to their practice and are dedicated to social action are selected to be in residence with us to engage in their creative processes, develop and offer art enrichment programs, and to serve as a mentor to a Maine-based Black or Brown artist. I'll be speaking more about the Artist in Residency program just a little bit later in greater detail. The second core function is public engagement and education. These programs are developed out of the Artist in Residence program. We selectively partner with local and national arts and cultural organizations and institutions of higher learning, as they typically have platforms that enable broad amplification for our artists' work, as well as audiences that can benefit from the exposure to our artists. This is the very definition of reciprocity. These offerings include artist talks, symposiums, workshops, and community events, which now brings me to the third core function, community building. Through this function, we are able to broaden in awareness, exposure, and understanding of the power inherited in the arts to communicate across racial and ethnic groups. How does our work impact our community, local and globally? Indigo Arts Alliance is the only Black-led arts and culture nonprofit organization in the state. By our mere existence, we are enriching the state's creative economy, providing a more inclusive and accurate representation of the state of Maine. We are serving the local and global Black and Brown community, including immigrants, refugees, and the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. In addition to our core values, our mission, and the two grounding principles, there are also 5 values that are pivotal to executing our work. Equity, which is addressing systematic and institutional racism, providing access to arts resources, and to encourage and ensure that there is equal representation in arts institutions. We are nurturing our community by serving Black artists, ensuring that their artistic development is supported and expanded through opportunities to continue growing their artistic practice. Through innovation, we are creating alternative pathways to cultivating Black arts and Black culture. We are defining, redefining, and centering Black history, culture, and brilliance. Freedom is a common word that is used a lot, especially in days and moments like this. But for us, we are defining freedom as the means to fully own and embody a spirit of independence to express our whole selves, honoring the ethics, values, aesthetics, tradition, and concerns of Black people. We are showing up authentically Black every day. When we have embodied equity that has been nurtured within an innovative and truly free environment, that is when we can enrich the lives of all members of the community. Earlier, I mentioned that at the heart of Indigo Arts Alliance lies the residency program intended for Black and Brown professional, mid-career, and emerging artists. When we say Black, we are referring to the African diaspora, those displaced as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, and the descendants of people from all African nations, African Americans, Afro-Latin, and Caribbean. The term Brown refers to Native Americans, Latinx, and those living across the Indian Ocean world, East and Southeast Asia, the Middle East and Pacific Rim. Essentially Black and Brown Indigenous peoples who have experienced colonization. To this date, we have had over 27 artists in residence, consisting of both our mentor-mentee program and our Driscoll Fellowship. Our artists have had the following cultural heritage, including some of the following countries: Belize, Peru, Brazil, Sierra Leone, Trinidad, Jamaica, Mexico, India, Ethiopia, Sudan, Barbados, Gabon, and Ghana. To honor the legacy of leadership of one of our elder mentor, David C. Driscoll. In 2021, we launched the David C. Driscoll Fellowship Black Seed Studio. This award is exclusively intended for local Maine-based artists. It offers rent-free studio space for an extended period of time, 3 months to be exact, providing opportunity to expand one practice figuratively and literally. These types of support are removing barriers to sustain a thriving creative practice, reinforcing that all communities can flourish when artists are provided the freedom and the opportunity to create. David C. Driscoll believed that artists thrive in community, and his wisdom was instrumental in building Indigo Arts Alliance liberation philosophy. We strongly believe in building lineage and legacies via the transference of cultural knowledge. That is why mentoring is at the essence of the residency programs. We situate mentoring as a dialogue between and among artists who share cultural histories and experiences. We intentionally pair artists, locally, national, and international, to cultivate rich conversations, collaboration, and exchange experiences, stories, knowledge, art industry information, and technical skills. Throughout the residency, the two paired artists have time to work independently as well. The ultimate goal of the pairing is to build positive relationships that enhance and strengthens each artist as human beings, building, hopefully, lifelong relationships. Our community programs have built art forums, bridged art forums, artists and communities together, providing a space for difficult conversations to be explored, to enlighten the public of a comprehensive diasporic history, the beauty of Black and Brown lives and our experiences, and the individual connectivity that can bind us together. The following statements are the voices of our artists in residence. They speak to how being in residence with us at Indigo has enriched their lives. Diane Smith, a New York-based abstract painter, sculptor, photographer, videographer, and installation artist of Caribbean descent, expressed, in this instant, when artists are subjected to the performance of Blackness under the lens of whiteness, it constricts the understanding that Black excellence already exists, so we don't have to perform it. Sonia Clark, a fiber artist based in Massachusetts, said that Indigo Arts Alliance is the essence of Black brilliance. There is community that exists in the space that just embraces you and you don't want to let go. I'm grateful to have this community to be a star in my constellation. Antonio Osha, a storyteller and mime artist, says, Indigo Arts Alliance is the portal, the family who is showing me the way to my Africa. Now that I have completed a residency, I know that I can always return to this creative and supportive womb. This place and the people within it are family. In the essence of time, I want to provide you with a preview of this year's upcoming programs that showcases the numerous ways we collaborate with our community. We are brought here today to celebrate the legacy of Dr. King, and in moments like this, we often highlight his vision, his bravery, courage, resilience, and fortitude. But all of those actions are stemmed in a deeper one, the action of love. In closing, I will pull from King's final manuscript. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Quoting, and I say to you, I have also decided to stick with love, for I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems. Indigo Arts Alliance was built out of love, the love for the arts, the love of our people, the love of a more beautiful, humane, and just world, the love of the idea of liberation. So I invite you to join us in building a more loving world for us all. a world where we can continue to be our ancestors' wildest dreams. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordia. That was a great presentation. I would now like to introduce Maria Gerard. She's the Executive Director of Wabanaki Reach, an organization whose mission is to support the self-determination of Wabanaki people through education, truth-telling, restorative justice, and restorative practices in Wabanaki and Maine communities. Maria Gerard is of the Penobscot Nation. She's a historian with particular expertise in the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act. She holds a master's degree in history from the University of Maine. She's a founder of the People's Garden community. The People's Garden, a community garden at the Penobscot Nation. Maria is a 2015 recipient of the prestigious Marianne Hartman Award for her advocacy work on preserving the rights and cultural heritage of the Penobscot Nation. I would now like to introduce Maria Gerard.
Hi, and good morning. I wanted to begin by first acknowledging the land where we all are gathered. I know we have many people coming from not only different parts of the so-called state of Maine, but also on other side of the world. So I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the land and the indigenous peoples of the lands, and to just ground us in our conversation. And I was really touched this morning by what Sam Jean-Francois had to say. And I just wanted to acknowledge you and say that I see you and I hear you, and I'm also tired. So big thanks to the Bates MLK Day Committee for inviting me into this conversation today. It's actually been about 7 years since I have accepted any invitation to participate in anything that Bates College is offering, and maybe I'll get a chance to explain that a little bit later. But for now, I'll just leave that as is and say that this topic of decolonization is something that is very much in the forefront of my thinking on a regular basis. And in order to think about decolonization, as many of the previous speakers have highlighted, we must first understand what it is that colonization did. I wanted to just begin by reading a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who we are honoring today, his legacy, and it's from the 1963 book, Why We Can't Wait. And in this book, he speaks of the origins of racism in this country. And he writes, quote, "Our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, the Indian, was an inferior race." He goes on to talk about the scar of racial hatred and how this disfigured the colonial society. And he continues in that vein, speaking that not only were we responsible for so much destruction, but then we elevated the tragic experience into a noble crusade. And so, think about history and manifest destiny. And oftentimes when I'm coming to these sorts of discussions and conversations, I'm coming from the lens of a Penobscot and of a historian. And I take that with me everywhere I go. And when I think about this noble crusade, I immediately think of that concept of manifest destiny, how somehow God led, the European invaders to this continent, to carry out their business. But here in Wabanaki, the land of the dawn, let me just share a little bit about how decolonization first affected us. And I share this, I have a lot of assumptions that perhaps people know this, but I share this because it's so important for us to be able to sit in that truth. So often we're in such a big rush to get to healing, to get to change, but it's important for us to be able to sit in the truth for a while as well. And first, let me just say that my perspective of what decolonization is about, and we've heard a few different definitions of what that could be and what that means for people. And I like that one about running out of patience, and that you all invited these impatient people. So now I know why I was asked to join this panel. But in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. and in the spirit of Mudaka Wandu, who was an ancient indigenous peacekeeper of this territory of Wabanaki, I want to speak into this conversation the concept of restoring relationality and looking at decolonization, not just about what colonization did to us, but I want to highlight also indigenous ways of knowing and being. So there was a brief mention about how it, destroyed languages, and it destroyed our ways of being and our governance and all of that. And so when we think about decolonization, we can also think about how do we elevate our own ways of knowing and being in this world. So decolonization here in Wabanaki was incredibly destructive process. And as a historian, I think back to my schooling and, in university and taking courses like colonial history, and, it all sounds so quaint and wholesome, and, building a existence out of the land. And it totally is devoid of the destruction that colonialism infected this land with, in the trauma that still exists today. And so what it did to the land in setting borders and boundaries and staking claim and cutting forests and damming rivers and setting fences. And almost immediately, this territory, which was the homelands of the Wabanaki people, became a resource extraction state. It became a place where wood could be cut for profit, where fish could be harvested for profit, where beaver skins were harvested for profits. And it broke the relationship between the people and the lands. And I almost always say that immediately upon colonization, when the first European invaders arrived on the shore, that it created an immediate cultural clash. And Wabanaki people, who were the original peoples of this land, were caught up in this imperialistic struggle between European nations. And so it was a very traumatic, very violent event that I dare say is still happening today. This clash in cultures and this breach in the relationship is still something that exists today. And we see the damages in the way of the extermination of Wabanaki people. And this was a policy in 1755. There was what was called the Scalp Proclamation, the Spencer Phipps Proclamation, that set a bounty on the heads of Penobscot men, women, and children. And I often share that bit of history alongside this image of my great-grandmother. And my great-grandmother, Mary Elizabeth, it was her great-grandmother's generation that needed to stay alive during this period of time when hunting Indians brought people a lot of money. In order to clear the land, in order for others to take over the land, the population needed to be culled. And so there's so much to say, and there's always so little time in which to say it. And I really appreciate, each time that Wabanaki people are invited to the table to share the pieces of what they have for information. And I was making a pie crust the other day. And oftentimes when I'm in the kitchen and I'm, got my hand in the dough or I'm rolling out a crust, and I always call them these kitchen epiphanies. And I wondered, what kind of world it would be if we could all just peel back everything, all these institutions and these rules and policies, when we peel it all back to just human beings. And, how do we get in touch with our humanity? And I talk about the history of what happened to Wabanaki people in their homelands. I'm not just talking about, some, my interest, my study of interest or whatever. I'm talking about relationships. I'm talking about my ancestors, past relations. I'm talking about now. I'm talking about what happens now in these ongoing fights with the colonial powers that be. These things of the past, these taking of lands and destruction of resources, the unbalanced relationship, those aren't just in the past. Now it's like the extermination effort, the assimilation effort. Now we're in this adjudication effort, and they can use the courts against tribal people to get what they can. And currently the Penobscot people are in a fight against the state of Maine government for our territory, our river, our namesake. And the state of Maine claims that our reservation, our Aboriginal reservation, we never got removed from our homelands. This is our Aboriginal reservation. It consists of about 200 islands in the Penobscot River, and the state of Maine government in 2012 gave an interpretation that the reservation includes no portion of the water. And so all the while I was studying history in a bachelor's program and a master's program, I used to always think about how things happened to my ancestors, the Penobscot people. I always wondered, how did it happen that, we reserved these lands in perpetuity and now we only have a fraction of it. And so when this most recent battle cropped up in 2012, I realized that, I didn't have to wonder anymore. Like, this is how it happens, and it's happening right underneath our noses. And I know, like I said, there's so much to talk about and so little time. And I just wanted to close in a couple ways. First, I wanted to acknowledge the organization for which I work, Wabanaki Reach. Reach stands for Restoration, Engagement, Advocacy, Change, and Healing. And we keep decolonization in the forefront of our work, and we're continuously asking the question, how does this benefit Wabanaki people? And we have a variety of public programming that helps non-natives to examine their personal privilege, and also to examine ways in which the organizations that they belong to, how they can look at decolonization. And so there's more information about the Wabanaki Reach programs on the Wabanaki Reach website, wabanakireach.org. And just in closing, just a little glimmer of hope. I always say I'm sort of this forever Pollyanna type person that always likes to hold up hope. Just the other day, I came across this idea that if if all of us devoted 1% to doing better each and every day, that the world would be 7 billion% better. And so again, I peel the conversation back to us as human beings and our personal power. And we'll just end with the notion from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where he says, never lose infinite hope. So thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much, Maria. I really appreciate you allowing us to sit in the truth with you for a little while, for you being able to give your testimony, and for you also directing us to where people can get the tools that they need to ensure that they're doing the work on your website. Okay, so the next person that I would like to introduce is Julia Sleeper Whiting. She's with the Tree Street Youth. Julia is a Bates alumni who founded Tree Street Youth along with a colleague. Tree Street Youth is the Lewiston-based community of youth and adults who use their diverse lived experiences and collective empowerment to co-create youth-centered programs and partnerships that encourage leadership, learning, exploration, and growth. Their vision is to create leaders who fear less, love more, dream big, and boldly shape the future, and creating communities united across lines of difference. Okay, I would now like to introduce Julia Sleeper Whiting.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you to everyone for being here and for the amazing speakers thus far. The wealth of knowledge in this little Zoom room is just, it's really empowering, and it's very challenging to be one of the last people to go. So with that, I'm also gonna follow Pious's lead. I had sort of been attempting to prepare something, and as most people know me, I'm not really great at that. I'm more of a reaction and roll with the moment. So that's where we're gonna head. So one of the most powerful things about the experience of listening thus far with everyone's stories and narratives and wisdom was, you know, wanting to sit in my own hard truth. And one of the things that I think is really critical in doing our own healing and process towards liberation is a recognition for many of us that we are a great product of colonization. I am a product of that. And I was raised in a way that was grounded in what I want to believe are the core principles of this belief in liberation and freedom, being second generation in of family members who came here seeking out a vision for their lives, originally from Lebanon, and coming, but then allowing things to happen with intention of being better, of growing, of creating the life that they were supposed to have in this country, including our name being changed from Saliba to Sleeper, thus my kind of silly last name of Sleeper, to having lands in the region of Katahdin up north in Maine that were the lands and continue to be the land of the Wabanaki people, who I got to be one of those extractors and witness the extraction for years as a retreat, as a space to go with my family and find peace and have that connection that the Wabanaki people have fought so long to endure those taking away from, witnessing clear cuts, witnessing that pain to the land itself, and also within my own spirit, not feeling right about what I was seeing, but also benefiting from the exact same practices. being the daughter of artists who could only do art if it meant being able to provide for our families, not grounded just in the creation and the liberation and the expression of that, but being tied to this capitalistic mentality of you can be an artist if, to my own education of, having grown up through Catholic schools, and there's certain ways and certain educations and certain practices and learnings, and there was a right education that I am greatly of value to that propelled me into my higher education at Bates College, that was really intended to ensure that I came out being a doctor or a lawyer or some sort of individual with practices that was gonna be able to make me money. And was gonna be able to keep me in a place of stability in my life, because the intention is to always support and help others, but only once you're stable enough to do it. And so what I learned through all of these narratives is that there was always a, yes, that is the direction. Yes, that is the morality. That is the value that you should be following, but only when or only if. And the liberation piece of this evolved for me significantly when I would say, tying back to the very, some of the original remarks, was when I actually did start becoming very impatient. I believe that was actually a great description, that oftentimes my impatience has been the thing that has been challenged or questioned in the pace at which I want to evolve things. Just for context, for people that may not know about me or the work that I do and my team does, 10 years ago, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, started the organization of Tree Street Youth, located right in the heart of downtown Lewiston. And that originally began with 4 college students, including my co-founder, Kim Sullivan, who was also a Bates student actually at the time. I had been a recent grad, and 3 other Bates College students, who actually 2 of which were from the environmental studies department, and 8 teenagers from the neighborhood who came together, and we wanted to run summer programming for kids of the neighborhood. And since then, we've grown and evolved and developed programming, obviously with youth-centered in its core, and still supporting academics and tutoring, homework help, and leadership development, and just giving kids a safe space to be and exist. But it's become so much more after years of walking alongside of individuals in our community, walking alongside of our staff, being individuals who are trying to build an organization in constant battle between this world of colonization and the way it should be, and the way you have to build an organization, or how your fundraising should go, or where you should be seeking support, or the methodologies around liability and safety being the drawing point for restrictions and rules and boxes, when oftentimes those stand in stark contrast to the mission and vision of fearing less, loving more, and dreaming bigger. And that constant rub and that constant battle is exactly that. I believe it is constant. It's why people are tired. It's why there needs to be a recognition that in order to truly become liberated, we must create space for the healing, but with that comes space for rest, and rest manifests itself in many different ways. It manifests itself in creating space for releasing those things that keep us, what the kids would call tight, all the time. When they walk into environments where they're uncomfortable, they're like, I'm just tight right now. And I think what's amazing about that is we oftentimes discuss like how one carries within themselves like that tightness. And sometimes it can be even visual to others, but sometimes it can be in being tight-lipped and not expressing. And sometimes it can be around being tight in your stomach and anxious and refusing to engage because you're fearing that the people will not receive what you have to say. And a lot of the times, every day here at the center, we're working with youth and young people who truly believe in the concepts of liberation, who truly believe in making worlds different and not being held to these boxes. However, every day we're also seeing the practices of colonization, even at times at risk within our own entities, restricting them, holding them back, and teaching them that there is a right way or a certain expression or a way of functioning. And that constant tension of growth and that constant tension of challenge and back and forth and rub of progression and empowerment and challenge and reserve. I think that was exactly when I read the title for today's theme for MLK Day at Bates this year. I was actually inspired that someone would name it, that it is that complicated, that it is in constant stark contrast to each other at all times, and that it is very difficult. And it also is why it requires everyone, because on those days when I can't push, someone else can pull. And on those days when they can push, I can rest, and we can constantly all work together to be able to have constant motion forward in combating what are going to be these grounded systems. And for some people, that means releasing these ideas of if and only or the right way. And for others, that means persevering forward. For others, that means resting and extending the trust to others who otherwise maybe historically weren't and who are part of the pain. I think with all of that, this was really on the fly, but I hope the takeaway message can be that there are ways to use your own lived experience to ground yourself in humility, to ground yourself in awareness of, yes, there are things that have created advantage for me. As an example, as I'm trying to stand here and be, in which all of my experience compiled has also been what has created a platform and an avenue now in which I need to be able to name that creating liberation is work, and so much of it is releasing of the control and of the mindsets that I was taught that there are perfect and right ways and correct ways, and that so often or not, I have been proven wrong. And I just so greatly appreciate being in community with this group of people. And even in this snowy day, even in the midst of COVID, even in the midst of so much chaos in our world, that there are still people so passionate and so willing to continue to lean in while also honoring the challenge and the exhaustion that comes along with it. So with that, thank you to everyone for your time. I hope even a little bit of that made sense to people, but I'm gonna close right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so we don't have much time left. However, I would like to circulate one question that I think I tried to encompass a lot of the different questions I wanted to ask. I asked for my panelists to please allow there to be enough space for everyone to get in a little bit of their input. Okay, so my question is this. It's to kind of set the tone for us moving forward. My question is, what information would you like for us to consider about the topic decolonization and liberation as we move into our breakout panels and performances and presentations? How would you like for your work or for this discussion to inform everything else that's going to come from out of this day and moving forward? And I, of course, want to keep on the table, what role does Bates play in the act of decolonizing, particularly us as faculty and students? I just want to put that out there. So anyone feel free to pick up the question, but I wanted to know, what would you like for us to consider as we move forward throughout the rest of this day? Go ahead, Pious, I saw your hand first.
Thank you very much. I think I will re-emphasize looking into your textbooks. And I may have caught the tail end of someone speaking about the history of where I think it's funding or something for Bates came from. I would think that in addition to that, Bates might want, it might be you, I got in when you were mentioning that. I think Bates might also want to look and see where they put their endowment fund and see that is there a history of slavery or the history of colonization in there, and then move it to a much cleaner, how do we call it, investment. And also build a relationship that will encourage decolonization in the community that you are housed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Julia, did I see your hand next?
No, but I can. Yeah, no, I would encourage Bates on many levels, obviously with your students and alumni network and beyond, and the professors and all of the staff working there. Just continue to strive towards, I would just challenge, like, what can you release? Like, what are the things you're holding on to that are perceived safety nets, are perceived as ways of function and of being, and also, you know, to noting the history and not being afraid of it. When I was at Bates as part of this, and Hamza, super excited to meet you this way, but the Harvard Center was one of the greatest points of access and barrier for me to the community. And not in a way that I say that it's that it's evolved so significantly because the needs have changed in the community so significantly. And not being afraid that when students like myself at the time were going beyond the movement of the programming, we're going beyond what was available at the time, I was welcomed with people who are like, are you sure? Or what are you exploring? What is happening? But then they embraced it and then leaned forward into it. Even if at the initial onset, there was a feeling of resistance or fear or concern for myself or for the institution or those things, I would not have created the center and where I am today would I had not had those types of support. But I also wouldn't have created it if some of those initial resistance had been upheld. And so I think there's again that tension that people speak of there that I would encourage people to note, to sit in that hard truth, and then also think about, like, what control or what release must one have in order to continue to keep those opportunities open, as well as to liberate students even from those institutional platforms or mechanisms or ways people are supposed to be functioning, especially as students on the campus. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Maria Gerard.
Yes, thank you for the question. The first thing that comes to mind for me is that since we are building a new relationship together, that a relationship building takes time. And so funny, this point about patience keeps coming up, but you know, it's going to take some patience. I always say it took us 100 years to get here. It's going to take a little while back. So as one elder says, you know, 5 miles into the woods and 5 miles out. And also, if I had to say to Bates, you know, what's one thing that they could consider is don't say one thing and then do another. And this speaks directly to my experience and why I did not return to Bates for 7 years after having co-taught a Wabanaki history class at Bates College and having been invited to Bates College to speak as an activist on the Penobscot River case. And it was during that time frame in 2015 when I was most active in my stewardship of the Penobscot River. And I was invited to speak at Bates College, but then I had learned that they had staff on board who served as an expert witness on behalf of the state of Maine in order to take more Penobscot territory from them. And so at that point in time, I was really upset and, you know, a little bit hurt and a little bit disgusted, because at the same time, Bates was touting this theme of wanting to build better relationships with Wabanaki people and for Wabanaki students and all of that business. While on the other hand, having this person that was really, you know, I can't describe to you the trauma that comes when you think about Indigenous peoples of the land, of the territory you're from, and all the losses that they experienced, and you know, our ancestral river. And so, you know, to do one thing, to say one thing and then do another really promotes some bad trauma on people. And this process of colonization has been very traumatic to those who have had to experience it.
Yes, thank you. Jordia, I saw your hand up next, and then Hamza. I'm gonna go ahead and extend so that we can get the last two answers to the question and then close out. So Jordia, you're up next.
Hi, Cassandra, it's Jordia.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you, though. Often these types of convenience take place to talk about possibilities, ideas, but there is no real action. Well, like Maria mentioned earlier when you spoke, I believe all of us are on the call today because we are impatient people. Indigo was created because we were also tired of waiting. We're tired of waiting for the invitation to the table, an invitation to the room to have our voices heard, and our bodies to be valued. So as an individual, no matter where you are in your career, your education, or your place in the community, you have to decide where you can serve the good of the people. Calling on the late John Lewis caused some good trouble. Are your actions holding others back? Are you stalling the process, i.e. not allowing your employees to unionize? Sometimes that means remaining in institutions that were founded on colonized ideology, or stepping outside of those structures to build your own. In both areas, there is an extreme amount of work. It will be an uphill battle. However, if the action is founded and grounded in love, the love to exist in a multiracial democracy, the progress towards that is the reward. We are all here on borrowed time. So if you want to continue to contribute to maintaining a capitalistic power, or contribute to strengthening community, thus people empowerment, that is ultimately your decision. But I truly encourage you all to choose the latter, because that path will only benefit us all, and the other path will eventually exclude you at the end of the road. So you can't achieve liberation without decolonization. So if you're here today, whether as an organizer, a listener, an alum, community supporter to this event, you are saying that you are choosing liberation. So your actions should be consistently decolonizing structures that are not equitable or inclusive. That means calling out family members, teachers, neighbors, public servants, etc. We should all be holding the other accountable. That is an action of love. It is truthful, and it will take consistent work. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now Hamza, please go ahead.
Thank you, Cassandra. And I really want to be very, very brief. But before I say very quickly my closing remark, I would like to remind the audience that we're leading another workshop in the afternoon about decolonization in Africa. So I would encourage you to participate if you have time to do so. Speaking of decolonization and liberation, I think for me, the takeaway is that we really think that as a community, we should acknowledge that decolonization and liberation, it's not just something that's in the past, but for a lot of people like me and like other people, it's something that is still ongoing and present. So as a community, what are we really doing to make Lewiston, Auburn, Maine, and this world a better place for our neighbors and our communities? So that's the bigger thing for me. And for Bates, the thing that I would want to emphasize is to be very intentional and honest about the work around diversity, inclusion, and equity at Bates, and also to really think about supporting the faculty and staff of color at Bates, and the role of Bates in the community. Although some organizations are very glad, the work that the Harvard Center does in the community, I am thinking of a bigger way that Bates as an institution can really engage in our local community, whether supporting the organizations or the community living in Lewiston and Auburn area. Thank you all.
Okay, I would like to close now, and I would like to thank the panel organizers, Tyler, Cliff, Alia, Sam. I would like to thank the panelists for sharing their work with us and for engaging us in rigorous discourse. I hope that this panel sets the tone for the presentations, panels, and performances to come, not just for today, but as we continue to move forward through this school year and for years to come. We ask you to continue to discuss and question, but most importantly, to act in order to sever colonial ties and to shape decolonial futures and to advocate for freedom and equity. I hope you have a great Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. And I'll just say, this has been recorded. Cliff and I are going to work on making that available to anyone who would like to view the recording. Thank you to our panelists, to our moderator, and we hope you'll sign up for the many exciting workshops we have and other activities throughout the day.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.